Welcome to Beautiful Thrift Homemaking. I'm Linda, and I'm reading through a vintage cookbook from 1917, and it has the fun title of 1,000 Ways to Please a Husband. We're in chapter 31 today, and this is in the month of August for our young couple, Bob and Bettina, as they start their new life together, and Bettina is excited about her homemaking, and she's teaching us about that. This chapter is called Bob and Bettina Alone. "Why, Bob, look at the front of your Palm Beach suit," exclaimed Bettina after she had greeted Bob at the door. "What in the world have you been doing?" "Pretty bad, isn't it?" said he ruefully. "Frank Dixon brought me home in his car, and he had some sort of engine trouble. We worked on it for a while, but couldn't fix it, so he phoned the garage, and I came home on the streetcar. I must have rubbed up against some grease. Do you suppose my clothes are spoiled?" "No," said Bettina slowly. "Not if I get at them. Let me see. What is it that takes out auto grease? Oh, I know. Bob, you go and change your clothes right away while I'm cooking the meat for dinner. Then I'll doctor these." "What will you do to them?" "I'll rub them with lard and let it stay on them for about an hour. Then after dinner I'll wash them out in warm water and soap. And then, well, Bob, I believe they'll be all as good as new." "I thank you, Mrs. Bettina." When Bob returned and Bettina was putting the dinner on the table, she smiled to herself over a new idea that had popped into her head. "Bob, what would you think if I should enter some of my nut bread at the state fair?" "Well, is that what you've been smiling about all this time? I think it would be fine. If I were a judge, you'd get first prize in a minute." "Say, strikes me this is a pretty good dinner." It consisted of ham, mashed potatoes, scalloped onions, rolls, butter, Dutch apple cake, and coffee. And Bettina's recipes in this chapter include that for ham and scalloped onions, in Dutch apple cake, and lemon sauce. Okay, lemon sauce is in there. It says to serve the Dutch apple cake with lemon sauce. Okay. So now we'll talk about those afterwards. Now let's look at chapter 32. Bettina attends a morning wedding. "How lovely," Bettina whispered to Bob after the beautiful ceremony had taken place in the rustic grape arbor. "How like Cousin Kate this is. But I had no idea that Frances planned to be married out of doors. Had you?" "She told me that they were hoping for fair weather, but weren't counting on it. And this is a regular golden day, isn't it? What a time to remember. Bob, look at Cousin Kate's flowers. A natural affair without decoration. Poppies, sweet peas, nasturtiums, cosmos, more kinds than I can count. It's a little earlier than they usually have weddings, too. Isn't it 9:30? Isn't 9:30 early?" "Yes, but Frances thought that this would be the prettiest time for it. And you know, they aren't at all conventional." "What are you two gossiping about?" shouted big cousin Charles in Bettina's ear. "Don't you see enough of each other at home without avoiding the rest of us at a time like this? Go and kiss the bride and congratulate the groom as soon as you can get to them. Fanny wants to see you particularly, Bettina. Breakfast is to be served on the porch. Don't forget that you two are to be at the bride's table." The wide porch looked very charming. Each table seated four, except the one for the bridal party and near relatives, which was in the center, surrounded by the others. On each table was a basket of pink sweet peas and trailing greenery. Each simple white place card held a flower or two, slipped through two parallel cuts across the corner. Frances was seated at the groom's left, and at her left sat her new brother-in-law, who was the best man. Next to him was the minister's wife, then jolly cousin Charles, the bride's father, then the groom's mother. At the right of the groom sat Anne, Fanny's sister, who was maid of honor, and next to her sat the clergyman. Then came the bride's mother and the groom's father. Beyond him sat Bettina, then Bettina's cousin Harry, then Aunt Nell and Bob. That was all, for there were few near relatives, and Bettina's father and mother were in California. Frances looks well, doesn't she? Said Aunt Nell to Bettina. No showers, no parties or excitement, and you can see how simple this wedding has been. Cousin Kate is so sensible, and so is Frances. I can tell you already that the breakfast menu will be dainty and delicious, but simple. She was right, for it consisted of watermelon cubes served in sherbet glasses, fried spring chicken, new potatoes, creamed peas, hot rolls with butter, currant jelly, peach ice cream, the bride's cake, coffee, nuts, and candy. All right. And we have here the recipe for the fried chicken, the gravy, the bride's cake. Oh, we have a wedding cake recipe in here from 1917. That'll be interesting to dive into. And then suggestions for serving the bride's cake. That will be interesting. So what that says is the bride's cake may be baked in this form and placed in the center of the table for the central decoration. A tall, slender vase filled with the flowers used in decorating may be placed in the hole in the cake. Place the cake upon a pasteboard box 4 inches high and 1 inch wider than the cake. This gives space to decorate around the cake. The cake and box may be placed on a reflector, which gives a very pretty effect. If cake boxes containing wedding cakes are distributed among the guests as favors, use the one in the round pan for central decoration and bake others in square pan. Square pieces may then be cut, wrapped in waxed paper, and placed in the boxes. All right, how fun. All right, join me for the deep dive into these 2 chapters in just a sec. All right, we're going to take our deep dive into chapters 31 and 32. And first of all, though, I want to remind you to stay hydrated. It is so warm out where I live, at least, and I think it was about 103 degrees today. So I'm drinking a little water with some electrolytes. Yep, so I hope you're doing the same. All right, so chapter 31, we've encountered stain removal again, this time for grease, auto grease. You know, last time we were talking about grass removal. So that is a duty of a homemaker, isn't it? To take care of the laundry, including removing stains. Then we have the Palm Beach suit that our Bob is wearing. And I looked that up to see what kind of suit is a Palm Beach suit. It turns out to be a lightweight suit, usually made out of cotton or linen. And it's not very fitted. It's somewhat loose and unstructured around the shoulders and such, so that it's more breathable in warm climates. And remember, we're in a chapter that's set in the summertime, in the month of August. And so this is fitting for him to wear, and he works in an office. All right. And the Palm Beach suit is probably a light color also. And he may even wear a straw hat with it, according to what I looked up, was often paired that way. And he took the streetcar home after the car of his friend was having a mechanical trouble. So that's fun. And then Bettina asked him, do you think I could enter my nut bread in the state fair? And I thought that was interesting. So where you live, do you have local fairs, district fairs? I know that where I live, there's a county fair that comes once a year. And yes, we can enter breads, we can enter canned goods, such as, you know, your jams and jellies and things like that, and cakes and cookies, pies, sewing projects, quilts, knitting projects, all that kind of stuff can be entered in the fair where I live. So I wonder, have you ever considered entering anything in the fair? I have the last couple years entered photography in the fair, and that's been really fun. And my daughter, right alongside me, my teen daughter, has entered in the fair also for photography. So I encourage you to participate in some things like this because it just builds a sense of community. All right. Now, the recipes in this chapter included the scalloped onions, and I noticed that that recipe really is using a white sauce, and we talked about white sauce and how important that is. That's a fundamental skill to develop as someone who's preparing food in a kitchen. And then we also had the Dutch apple cake, and I'm going to go over that with you a little bit. Why do I prefer the desserts all the time? I don't know, but the scalloped onions actually sounds really good. That has a little breadcrumbs on top, baked on the top of it, buttered breadcrumbs. So, well, let me tell you about the scalloped onions. It's a recipe for 2 portions. It takes 1 cup of cooked onions mixed with a half a cup of a white sauce. And then you pour those into a buttered baking dish. Remember, this is only for 2 portions, so it'd be a very small dish. Melt 2 tablespoons of butter and stir it into 3 tablespoons of fresh breadcrumbs. And then place the buttered crumbs on top of the onions. Brown the mixture in the oven about 15 minutes. Since you started with cooked onions, that's all that time that's required on that. So that's probably a really tasty side dish, and let me know if you try that. Dutch apple cake is also just for 2 portions, and that is a little cake that's made where the batter then has sliced apples placed neatly in rows lengthwise in length, and then on top of that there's a sugar cinnamon sprinkled on it. And so that's very, very fun. A nice variation. She does a lot of things with apples in her baking. Okay, and the lemon sauce was quite different to be served over that, wasn't it? And that would be warm. I actually says to serve it hot. Let me tell you what the lemon sauce is made out of. It's made out of sugar, salt, flour, water, butter, and the juice of 1 lemon. Okay. It's cooked for 7 minutes. And then the butter and lemon juice are added at the end and stirred in, and then it's poured over the warm Dutch apple cake. Yeah, all right. So that's chapter 31. Chapter 32 is especially fun for me. I don't know why I'm so thrilled by the idea of this wedding. I think for one reason that it was very simple, and I like that myself. It's an outdoor wedding, took place in the morning, which was really different. The bride believed that it would be a really lovely time of day to have a wedding. And I would agree, 9:30 in the morning. And notice the flowers included sweet peas. Those happen to be my favorites. I have a hard time growing them where I live. I know they do grow here, but we have certain insects that like to eat them when they're young, and then we have deer that like to eat them also. So I don't really get to grow them here. I do wish I could. Perhaps if I found some secure place for them, I could grow them. I really should try one of these days. Maybe when I retire, I'll try to grow sweet peas. And then after the wedding, breakfast was served on the porch. And again, there are pink sweet peas trailing from each table with some greenery. That just sounds lovely to me. And the menu was very interesting for this morning wedding, which now it's probably getting on to lunchtime, right? So it's probably more of a lunch menu. They're having fried chicken. So she has you cut up a whole chicken, a 2.5-pound chicken. And I remember as a young bride years and years ago that I got a whole chicken and thought that I would cut it up, and I hadn't had any instruction in that. and my knife was not very sharp, and I was extremely frustrated. And I remember having myself a little tantrum over that, to tell you the truth. So I was careful when my daughter was in high school to help her to learn to cut up a chicken. Now, I don't know if she remembers because we only did it a couple times, because quite honestly, we do tend to buy chicken that's already cut up. We buy thighs or some other parts like that. However, occasionally I do get a whole chicken. So the chicken is cut up, and then it's sprinkled with salt and paprika and rolled in flour, and then placed in the fat in the frying pan. It's browned, and then interestingly, it's covered with some water and the lid, and then cooked very slowly for about a half an hour and turned frequently. I don't know about the water being added to the pan. That seems very, very different because there's oil in the pan. And she doesn't explain that exactly. So there we have that. And then we have our gravy, which is made by loosening the pieces of chicken which have stuck to the frying pan, adding some butter, stirring constantly until the butter bubbles, and then adding some flour, salt, and paprika again. Mixing thoroughly, then slowly adding in milk and cooking for about 2 minutes, then adding some chopped parsley, and then pouring the gravy into a gravy bowl for serving. Now, what I noticed is she's making a roux, and that, as you may remember from our other chapters about the white sauce, that basic technique of having a fat, whether it's oil or butter, and getting that hot, and then stirring in some flour until the flour is slightly cooked but not darkly browned, and then slowly pouring in your liquid such as your milk, and that is that roux process. So a key thing to learn to do. I think it's something I wish I had known much earlier, because my husband does love the gravy. Now, I'm interested in the bride's cake. I hope you were too. And she served this with peach ice cream. And doesn't that sound great for summer? To have some white cake. And it is a white cake. And also I noticed that the flavoring in this cake, being that it's a bride's cake, the flavoring, yes, there was a teaspoon of vanilla in the recipe, but also a half a teaspoon of almond extract. And I thought, yes, that makes sense, because that is kind of that distinctive wedding cake flavor. Do you agree? So also in this recipe, she used egg whites only, and she beat them up till stiff peaks and folded them in at the end just before she put the batter into the cake pan. And I want to talk about the cake pan, but as far as folding those stiffly beaten egg whites into a batter, we've talked about that before too. That's a wonderful technique to make a light and fluffy product. All right, so the pan. I did a little research on this because it was intriguing to me that the bride's cake was donut shaped and just one layer. And that empty area in the center had a slender vase with flowers in it. And I thought, that sounds really pretty. And like Bettina said, she admired the simplicity and yet the beauty of the preparations for this wedding. So the bride's cake was frosted with the white mountain cream icing, which I tried earlier on in some of the earlier chapters. I think that was actually in chapter 4. And I made some of that and put over the little chocolate cakes. Now that white mountain cream icing is cooked on the stovetop. And I think for some recipe like this, for a whole cake, you would need to actually make more than the recipe in chapter 4 would have called for. But in any case, it says here that the bride's cake then was served with the peach ice cream, which sounds great. And so very fun, very fun. Let me see if I have anything else. I want to talk about that pan. I mentioned that. So the pan is shaped like a donut, right? I looked up that. What kind of pan is round with a hole in the middle? It's called a ring cake pan. Or there's another one that's kind of flatter called a French, oh, I can't read my page because it's curving over. A French Savarin pan, a French Savarin cake. That was kind of smaller, it's about a 9-inch. Then the regular ring cake pan is slightly bigger than the French Savarin cake pan. But a ring cake pan is sometimes used for pound cakes, it said. And the hole in the middle is about 3.5 inches across. So I guess about that big across. So you can see that a little slender glass vase or crystal vase would fit in the middle there. All right. Now this is opposed to a cake pan, not the same as an angel food cake pan, because if you can remember or think about that, it has kind of a slope in the middle. And then the bundt cake pans also have the ridges down the sides, but they do also have an opening in the center, but not as large. So again, if you want to make that effect and try it out yourself, look for a ring cake pan. You can find them online for less than $30. All right. Display of the cake was fun. It's on a little raised platform about 4 inches high, and then a reflector is put underneath. Now I'm thinking of a mirror type thing, but I don't know for sure what she meant by a reflector. All right. Then additionally, the guests were served small boxes, small square boxes of a slice of cake to take home with them as party favors. Now that was the same cake recipe as the bride's cake and decorated with the icing as the bride's cake was, but it was baked into a square or rectangular pan so that the pieces could be cut square and put into a little square box. And the cake pieces were wrapped in waxed paper. So that was fun, and then put into their boxes. So I don't know why, that's just so charming to me. I really enjoyed hearing about that, and I hope you did too. Join me for chapters 33 and 34 next, which are also in August. We're going to have After the Tea, and it's going to have quite a few recipes, along with Bettina Gives a Porch Breakfast. I hope you're enjoying these stories. Thank you. Again, ask me any questions that you might have down in the comments.